You check your phone, a message arrives from someone 4,000 miles away, and you don't think twice about it. The world feels small, connected, wired together by cables under the ocean and satellites overhead. You assume this is new, a modern miracle. The real answer is far stranger. 4,000 years ago, in a stretch of grassland so remote that most maps left it blank, people were already doing something similar. Not with phones, with tin. Picture the Central Asian steppe, flat, windswept. Thousands of kilometers from the nearest palace, the nearest port, the nearest name you'd recognize from a history textbook. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists assumed this region was empty in every way that mattered. A gap on the map between the civilizations that counted. Then the ground told a different story. In the 2000s, archaeologists surveying a site called Semiyaka in what is now northern Kazakhstan started finding something they didn't expect. Furnaces, not one or two, dozens. Slag heaps taller than a person. Evidence of metalworking on a scale that made no sense for a supposedly isolated outpost. Why would a settlement in the middle of nowhere need an industrial-sized bronze operation? The answer came down to one element: tin. Bronze is copper and tin, mixed. Copper is common. It's scattered across the ancient world in workable deposits. Tin is not. Usable tin ore sits in only a handful of places on Earth, and almost none of them are anywhere near the Mediterranean or the Near East, where bronze was being demanded by every emerging power from Egypt to Mesopotamia. This has puzzled historians for a long time. Where was all that tin coming from? For decades, the leading theory pointed to a shipwreck. The Uluburun wreck, discovered off the coast of Turkey, was loaded with 10 tons of copper and roughly a ton of tin, dated to around 1300 BCE. Researchers analyzing its cargo, including work led by geochemist Ernst Pernicka, traced isotopic signatures in the tin that didn't match any known Anatolian or European source. The tin had to come from somewhere else, somewhere far away. For years, the best guess was Afghanistan, but the isotopic match was never quite clean. There were gaps in the story, and gaps in archaeology tend to get filled eventually, usually by something nobody was looking for. Semiyaka changed the conversation. Excavations directed by researchers including Emma Usmanova revealed that this steppe settlement wasn't some accidental leftover of Bronze Age life. It was a hub, purpose-built for large-scale metal production, positioned near tin-bearing deposits in the surrounding uplands, and connected by a network of related sites stretching across the region. The people here weren't isolated. They were positioned at the source of one of the most valuable materials in the ancient economy, and they built an entire industry around extracting and processing it. So where did the tin actually end up? That question is still being argued. A 2022 isotopic study on the Uluburun cargo, along with related tin samples from Turkey, reopened the possibility that Central Asian tin, potentially including sources connected to sites like Semiyaka, made its way thousands of kilometers to the eastern Mediterranean. Other researchers remain unconvinced, pointing to competing signatures from tin deposits in Uzbekistan and elsewhere. The dispute hasn't been settled. What has been settled is the assumption that started this whole problem, that a place this remote couldn't have mattered. It mattered enormously. Think about the logistics for a second. No roads in the way you'd picture them, no wheeled convoys moving in a straight line. Just herders, traders, and pack animals moving raw ore and worked metal across steppe, desert, and mountain pass, handed from group to group, community to community, over distances that would take modern vehicles days to cross. And they did it well enough that a bronze sword forged in Mesopotamia might contain tin that started its journey in a furnace on the Kazakh steppe. Nobody signed a contract for this. There was no central authority coordinating it. It worked because enough small groups, generation after generation, kept doing their part of the exchange, kept trusting that raw material moving one direction would come back as something valuable moving the other. That's not a footnote to Bronze Age history. That's the circulatory system of it. Here's the part that should sit with you a little longer than the rest. For most of the last century, the working assumption in archaeology was that connection radiated outward from a small number of centers. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Aegean. Everything else was periphery. assumed empty until proven otherwise. Semiyaka is one of several sites now forcing a rewrite of that map. Researchers like Brian Hanks have argued that steppe societies weren't passive suppliers waiting to be discovered by more advanced civilizations. They were active participants, running their own industries, making their own decisions about where their resources went and on what terms. The steppe wasn't empty, it was busy. We just weren't looking at it correctly. So think again about that message on your phone. The fiber optic cable under an ocean, the satellite relay. You picture that infrastructure as something entirely new, something that finally connected a world that used to be scattered and alone. But 4,000 years ago, without a single wire, without a single satellite, a bronze object in a Mediterranean palace could carry, inside its own metal, the memory of a furnace on a steppe nobody thought mattered. The world was never as disconnected as the blank space on the old maps made it look. It just took long enough for someone to notice.